We're back with more Common Knowledge, the show where I take a look at common Magic the Gathering cards and tell you, are they any good in the Pauper format or not? Let's get started right away with Light Shield Parry. It's from Aetherdrift. It's a single white mana for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it also has Cycling for 2 mana. So you pay 2 mana, you discard this card, and you draw a card. I kind of don't hate this. You know, you're not quite getting a giant growth. You're getting 2/3 of a giant growth. But it has Cycling, and Cycling's never bad. It's always nice to have Cycling on a card, especially a card that is a little bit more niche of a use case, like this combat trick is. You're not always going to need a combat trick. And at some point in the game, you might go, there's no reason to hold on to this combat trick anymore. I'll rather cycle it away. And you can with this one. That's nice. I do like all these things. Even still, even with the cycling that makes it generically fine, I think you still just generally have better options to put in your deck than this. And you should. You should play those cards instead. I will still give it a pretty respectable 3.7, I think. It's pretty darn versatile and can work in a lot of different ways in a lot of different decks. But overall, I think you probably just don't play it. It's a good card, though. Reckless Airstrike, single red mana for a sorcery. Choose one. Reckless Airstrike deals 3 damage to target creature with flying, or you destroy target artifact. I don't hate this either. This seems fine. 3 damage to a creature with flying. There's enough of those out there. You know, white decks are playing Glinthawks or Core Skyfishers. Black decks are playing Refurbished Familiars. Blue decks are playing like the Delver of Secrets that flips over. Fairies all are gonna basically die to a 3 damage. Here you got a lot of options to hit at this point. Green and red might be a little less, but there's still potentially things that you can hit. I don't know. And then destroy an artifact. Artifacts are pretty plentiful, and there's some good ones to destroy. If you can just grab not one of the bridges, because those have indestructible, but one of the Mirrodin artifact lands, that can take away some land for the opponent. That's always good. Just take out a Mirror Enforcer with a single mana. It'd be much better if this thing was instant speed. Don't get me wrong, but even at sorcery speed, I kind of gotta respect it. It has enough modality that I would not be embarrassed putting this in a sideboard, knowing that it comes in not just against the artifact decks or not just against the fairy decks, but having a handful of options where this might be one of those useful cards that you want to grab. I'm going to give this a pretty darn good score. It might shock you. I'm going to give this thing a 5.3. 5 is usually where I say is the cutoff to Pauper playability. So if anything above a 5, I think could certainly go into a Pauper deck and do quite well. Sometimes 4s will be like, oh, that could go in a Pauper deck, but I think this one kind of should. I think it should go in some Pauper decks. And I have some red decks that probably wouldn't mind a card like this. You know, it's not going to be quite as good as something like Cast into the Fire, which exiles artifacts and can deal 1 damage to multiple creatures. So potentially you take out a couple fairies, and that also is at instant speed. The exiling artifacts means it can take out bridges too. It costs twice as much as this does, but you're probably going to find people generally will take Cast into the Fire instead of this. But even still, I kind of just like it. I think it's pretty solid. What do we have next? It's Ascendant Dust Speaker. We did this one somewhat recently when we did our Secrets of Strixhaven full Pauper set review, but let's take a look at it now, see if anything's changed. 4 and a white for a 3/4 Orc Cleric with flying. When this creature enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Yeah, I remember this one. I remember thinking it was okay then. It's kind of nice to have the repeatable exiling of a card from a graveyard. You generally want to be able to do that more at instant speed, though. to stop your opponent from exhuming something. Doing it more gradually, I guess that's going to help against something like Terror decks, Mono Blue Terror decks. But for the most part, I don't think that's a huge deal. It's nice. It's nice little gravy here, but 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer is it is kind of a 4/5 flyer when you think about adding a 1/1 counter to something, but it does have to be something else. It can't be on this. So you don't want to play this into an empty board because you're just missing the value out of it. So having to have a second creature, your opponent can kill that second creature before the counter gets on it. It's okay. I don't think it's specifically good enough to really go in any deck, and it's certainly not good enough to start building a deck around it. So kind of just in a no man's land. We'll go ahead and give this thing. I'll give it a 3. I think it's versatile enough that it deserves that, but probably not much better than that. Witty Roastmaster, 2 and a red for a 3/2 Devil Citizen with Alliance. Whenever another creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. We do like these, don't we? Your Impact Tremor style effects. Having one on a creature is kind of nice. Now we do have the Raphael that just came out. Which one is it? Here it is, Tough Turtle. And it has basically the same thing, but just kind of look at the raw stats here. 2 mana for a 1/3. Also, he's a legendary creature, so your cast downs aren't going to work on this guy, where they're definitely going to work on Witty Roastmaster. You're spending an extra mana for Witty Roastmaster, but you're also getting a 3/2 instead of a 1/3. Might be worth considering. The problem is I generally don't want my my Impact Tremor style creatures to attack. I want them to stay back, stay alive, and keep doing their thing turn over turn. And this guy goes, I don't know, maybe get him in there. And then your opponent starts double blocking things, or just incentivized to block against this guy more often. 2 toughness makes it a little bit more vulnerable to more creatures out there, or more spells and other effects. You can Arms of Vidar to this guy. You can't Arms of Vidar Raphael. So there's reasons why I think Raphael just ends up being the better card, and the 2 mana is probably the biggest reason. But Raphael is generally just a strict upgrade to this guy, which is a little bit sad because, one, I like the name, I like the card, I like that it's not Universes Beyond, but we kind of passed that bridge, didn't we? Yeah, this just doesn't see play, and Raphael does. And it's not like Raphael took this guy's spot. This guy wasn't seeing any play before. And now those decks that are playing Raphael have kind of built around Raphael and Impact Tremors, and sometimes they'll be Gruul style Eldrazi decks that are making lots of Eldrazi spawns that also will trigger all those alliance effects. Yeah, he's cool. He's cool, don't get me wrong. I still will give him a 3.3, but yeah, just never quite got a chance, and that feels kind of bad. What do we got next? It's Sighted Cast Sorcerer. 1 and a white for a 1/1 human wizard sorcerer with Exalted. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Okay. And you can pay a blue mana, and this creature gains Shroud until end of turn. That's kind of interesting. So it has a white in its cost, and it has a blue activated ability. So you're mostly going to be thinking Azorius decks, or Azorius that splashes another color, your Jeskai decks, or Esper decks, something like that. Exalted is an interesting ability. This is kind of nice to just have this guy hang back, and his effect triggers as long as you swing in with one guy. How many white decks and or Azorius decks are really just swinging in with one guy? Kind of the point of white decks is a lot of white weenie stuff going wide. A little counterproductive to that, but not the worst thing in the world. I do like being able to just give him Shroud whenever you need to, so he's probably going to be pretty unkillable from an opponent's perspective. Arms of Vidar or Breath Weapon's going to get him, but targeted removal specifically just kind of does nothing to this guy as long as you got mana up. And even if you don't have mana up, then your opponent goes after this guy, which means they're not going after you, or probably the other creature that you want to protect more. He's still not very good. It's 2 mana for a 1/1 that kind of doesn't do anything else. You want him to just sit in the back. I guess he can block. And yeah, you can have him sit back and block when he needs to, but even on the turn he comes in, the other creature that you attacks with still gets the advantage of the Exalted, and then you can block later. I think he's probably just a little slow and a little wasteful of that slot in your deck. So I'm not really going to use him. I could see a deck that might make it work, especially if you have a creature who might be unblockable and that Exalted trigger helps out. Maybe this could go in a Gates deck, knowing that you're pumping up one creature pretty big. I think if you're doing that, you're already pumping the creature big enough that you don't need the Exalted trigger on it too. But maybe. But I think we're going to go with something like a 2.7. That's where I'm at on that guy. Next up, Pinion Feast for a green for an instant that says destroy target creature with flying, and you bolster 2, which means you choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you control, and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. I don't love this. I don't love it for a couple reasons. One, it costs a lot. 5 mana is quite a bit of mana. There's a lot cheaper ways of destroying a creature with flying. Green has plenty of those ways that don't cost 5 mana. You could probably still do them at instant speed too. So I don't love that. So what are you really paying for? You're probably paying for the bolster 2. And the bolster 2 is fine. Instant speed, you put a couple counters on a guy. I don't mind it. I don't like that bolster 2 is specifically looking for your creature with least toughness. You're not really min-maxing yourself at that point, which you kind of want to do in most cases. It's nice to have one creature that can really break through. I guess when your opponent is a huge removal pile, it's nice to spread those things out. But I like to have the option of what I do. And bolster doesn't give me the option. It forces me to choose the smooth things out route. And I don't love that. I also don't love that if I play this into an empty board on my side, the bolster just doesn't help. It just doesn't trigger for any of the things that I need it for. So I'm just paying 5 mana to kill a flying creature at instant speed, and I go back to green has much cheaper ways of doing that. You can make an argument that, if you have a deck that uses +1/+1 counters and also needs to take care of flying creatures, hey, this card kind of does both. It does more. It adds more stuff to a single slot of your deck. And I suppose that's true. I just don't know if I need either of these effects in my deck all that much. This is going to be sideboard piece at best. Because if you're not going to put this in the main deck, maybe you go against a guy who doesn't have any flyers. Then this card is kind of useless. Because I believe it does need to have a target for you to play it at all. So you're not just going to be able to get the bolster 2. You can't just bolster 2 for 5 mana. I'm pretty positive. You must choose a creature in order, with flying in order to cast Pinion Feast. You can't cast it without a legal target just to bolster. There you go. So you really need your opponent to have a flyer to be able to play this card in the first place. And I don't think it's good enough for you to do that. And I don't think it's good enough even if they do have flyers. So let's go with... I think this is one of those cases where this isn't really a terrible card, but I do think because of the mana cost, because of the restrictions around it, it feels enough like a trap that I want to give it something in the 1 range just to make a statement hey, these are bad, stay away from them. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to give this thing a 1.5 and just kind of put up a big flashing red sign that says, don't play this card. You play something better. There's so many other cards that are better than this one, and play those instead. Guild Pact Informant, 2 and a blue for a 1/1 fairy rogue with flying. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you proliferate. Okay, so it's a fairy, and it's in mono blue. So does it go in mono blue fairies? No. No, not really. Mono blue fairies doesn't really need to proliferate. There's very few instances of counters getting put on there. You're not really having any creatures with toxic that you need to put on. I guess you could use the store. Are they called the storage lands? The ones that have the depletion counters on them. So you could use this as a way of proliferating those and continuing to get more mana out of them. Your mono blue fairies just doesn't need that, though. It's a very straightforward deck that mostly just plays islands. So I don't even think you need those other lands. This also being a 3 mana 1/1 flyer isn't great either. Fairies decks are mostly about putting out cheap fairies that can then be flipped into ninjas. This thing costs more than some of the ninjas you would play. So it's kind of negative mana value or mana advantage, exactly. Tempo, I suppose, by trying to put this into your fairies deck. I don't think it's very good. Yeah, I think that's just the easier way of putting it. I just don't think it's very good, and it's not going to take up any of those slots that those other fairies could take up in those decks. I'm still going to give it a 2.3. There probably are some proliferate decks that don't mind a card like this, but we do have a number of proliferate decks in the format, and they don't play this card either. So yeah, I think it's mostly just on the outside looking in. 2.3, I think, is a fair score for that. Jadecraft Artisan, 3 and a green for a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman. When this creature enters, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. That's an exceedingly normal Magic card. 4 mana for a basically vanilla 3/3. Nothing really to write home about. A temporary +2/+2 boost. Okay, I guess. If you play this on an empty board, now this guy becomes a 5/5 for 1 turn, but he doesn't have haste, so it's not like he's swinging in for the 5. Yeah, I'm just not very enamored with it. It's very normal and not particularly good. So let's go ahead and give this thing a. I'm going to give this a 2. I think it's actually quite bad. Maybe I'll bump it up to 2.1, but still pretty darn bad. This is a last official, I think. I think this is the last official for the day. Timber Maw Larva, 3 and a green for a 2/2 beast. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each forest you control. Oh, I like that. Pretty easy to just play a bunch of forests, and then you can make this guy pretty darn big. But when its normal life is at a 2/2, and on your opponent's turn, this is going to be a 2/2. It is probably pretty easy for them to pop this guy. He doesn't have any sort of evasion, so yes, he could get big, but he could just be blocked by tokens all day. You want to find a way to give him trample, maybe a rancor or something like that that can add a little bit more to him. You could make it work, but a lot of these creatures that grow and grow big start out cheaper. And this guy starting at 4 mana and starting at such a low 2/2 makes him really vulnerable, and if he does get popped, then you really feel like you've wasted your turn and maybe even your entire play by trying to use this guy. And I don't love that. I'm going to give it a 2.5 and wish it were better. Let's get ourselves a bonus card and then get you out of here. Falcon Wrath Noble. All right. 3 and a black for a 2/2 Vampire Noble with line. Whenever this creature or another creature dies, target player loses a life and you gain a life. Falcon Wrath Noble feels like a classic. How far back does this go? This is Certainly before I came back to Magic. I don't know. I don't know when this thing started. Did it? Is that a Innistrad? Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That just makes sense. I should have guessed that. Um, it's okay. It's a lot like some of the other cards we've looked at. You're kind of a lot like the card we just looked at. 4 mana for a 2/2, and it flies, so you do give it a bit of grace on that. And it does have this nice passive ability that's okay. Generally, I think you're going to look more for something like the Pactol Terror that has when something enters, the drain happens. This is when another creature dies. Now, this does say another creature, not another creature of yours. So this works for your opponent's creatures too. That's kind of nice. If they're trying to use some sacrifice, if they're in mono black sack or something like that, they're getting drained every time they sacrifice one of their own guys. If you have an opponent who is playing with Eldrazi tokens, Eldrazi spawns, every time they sacrifice those guys, they're getting drained. That's kind of nice. That is some interesting tech against something like that. And then if you have your own deck that is sacrificing a lot, then this guy can trigger quite a bit too. I don't think it's quite good enough to go into mono black sacrifice. And most of that is because the mono black sacrifice is so efficient and so narrow in what it does that it doesn't need something that has this high a mana cost unless it's going to be like a real finisher like a Gary, I suppose, a Grey Merchant of Asphodel. And this not being particularly good sacrifice fodder itself, it does say another creature dies, so you can't just kill this and get the drain too. I think that deck just wants to make that Carrion Feeder and that Mortician Beetle as strong as possible, and Falconwrath Noble isn't really needed for the extra reach there. Mono Black Sack just kind of does its business without it. So, unfortunately, it's kind of a card without a home. Even though it's a pretty classic Magic card, this is one that you're not always surprised to see it in Commander these days. Probably was a lot more prevalent in Commander before we had so many new cards that we could slot in that just end up being slightly better than this in most ways. Somebody's probably going to spend the extra mana and money to get a Vein Ripper in their deck instead, and this is just better. this is just such a better card. But if you're making a Vampire Commander deck, maybe they both go in there. Then you can do some real awful vampire drain shenanigans, sacrifice shenanigans stuff, and kill all your opponents. But for the Pauper format, yeah, Falconwrath Noble is a nice trip down memory lane, but not one that you're going to want to play these days. I'm still going to give it a 3.1. Let's give it a 3.1. Remember it for what it is, and understand that it just doesn't have it anymore. And for Pauper, maybe it never did. Pretty sad. Sad note to end on, but that's where we go. We'll see you tomorrow. Maybe we'll get better cards then. See ya.